see a lot of different meetings with the
They're notorious.
Western Washington, so
like Don and Rockland.
What's that?
I've been all over Western Washington there.
I know. It's supposed to be tomorrow, but I got canceled.
Mixed drink. Okay, alcohol.
Do you need
Cola and cream.
I got shit out of the house today.
Well, something similar to that, something with sweet, and I'm pretty sure that's.
I'm not for trying. It tasted like a melted root beer float. That's what it tasted like. It was really good.
But that's not.
So I don't know.
I would put a little, something in yours.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm pretty
It's
sure
like,
it's the same thing.
okay, I'm gonna try that.
I can't say I remember every word off the top of my head.
I would have never done this with the other chair.
Yeah.
It's only because
They got you in the wrong side.
It's clueless how to make it.
Well, it has cream too, in the cooler with the.
Recording?
Whenever you're ready, yep, we're recording. You guys go for it.
Let's go.
Go for your microphones.
I'd like to call to order the Wednesday, December 14th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting for the City of Tenino. Good evening, everybody. Let's start with reviewing the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve unless somebody has something.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Agenda's approved. Move on to the minutes from the November 9th meeting.
It's a pretty short one, I remember, right? Didn't we just
This-
kind of talk about that?
This was the
About the
RV.
whole RV thing the whole
Yeah.
time?
I'll move
make
to
a-
approve.
Oh, go ahead.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting minutes are approved. As presented, let's move along. Any public comment? Reports from the city?
I did go to the city council meeting last time, but wasn't on the agenda, but I wanted to be there just in case they brought up the RV thing, but they were doing their end of the year budget, so they didn't put it on this last one, so they hopefully will get it on it the first of the year. If not, I don't know what they're having meetings this month, but maybe like January before we, so I didn't tell them anything about it. We just, I'll try to make sure I attend when it gets on the agenda.
Perfect.
Did go to it's not really city, I guess I could bring up a little bit, the fire department had they're looking at doing possibly building a new station. They passed a bond, I think it was a bond or some kind of funding source, or you know more than I know about it, but so they're talking about how they're gonna move forward with that, and so that may be something that comes up, depending on where they decide, if they decide to build and where they decide to build it, may be something that comes before us. Like I said, you probably know more, but if you can.
Well, and as we go through the process too, definitely, we really want to make sure that we're communicating with all of the different community groups. So when we get to a spot that we're ready, we'll definitely make sure we come and discuss.
Right. I don't think we have any public hearings or unfinished business listed, so we're on to new business and the draft housing needs analysis, which is a sizable packet here.
Yes.
A lot of information.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff in there. Thanks for spending a little time reviewing that. I want to introduce to you a planner in our office, Lissa Paulson. She crafted a good portion of or most of the housing needs analysis. Some of the statistics which you may remember seeing earlier this spring when I just kind of did a quick OFM ACS download just to kind of as an existing conditions approach. So some of that stuff should be familiar. I'll let Lissa kind of go through and do a high level synopsis of it, and then we'd like to just kind of have a discussion. The intent being that we've done some kind of qualitative input with stakeholder interviews. talked to, and I think I shared that with you earlier this year as well. Shake your head yes or no. Yes, no. Talked to Becky Stevens, Aslan Mead, Brock Williams, Ron Stewart, Jesse Simmons, Clint Endicott, and Tyler Whitworth. So those folks we chatted with. So we got that qualitative input, and then the quantitative input is all the stuff from the Census Bureau and the Office of Financial Management and other places like Zillow and other data sources. So that quantitative data is what we're going to be kind of sharing with you now. And when we have the qualitative and the quantitative and we put them together, then we start looking at strategies. And so that's kind of the part that we're asking for you to consider and start thinking about, and we'll get at that in the January meeting. We'll come back with some initial strategies. I don't want to steal your thunder, but that's kind of where we're headed.
You get a little button on your microphone there too. Turn on.
It goes green.
Okay. Yeah, so as Dan said, my name is Melissa Paulson. I've been working on the housing needs analysis, which is the qualitative piece, or the quantitative piece, backing up the qualitative of just basically interviewing and all of the public outreach. So as part of that process, basically, I'm just going to go through a high level, kind of go through the list of like, hey, this is what we found. Stop me if you have any questions, or you can wait to the end. Pretty lax in regard to how it flows. So I think the biggest thing is that Tenino is projected to grow to about 2,755 residents by 2040. So right now that's about an additional 730-ish residents. And while that may sound small to a lot of people, to a city like Tenino, it's a big jump. And it means that there's going to be a lot of housing capacity needs that are going to have to be met. Census data shows that statistically you have a younger population. There's a little bit of a jump in the, I believe it's like 65 to 69 age range. That's a little higher than regional comparison. But otherwise, statistically, you guys are a lot younger than Thurston or the state. What that means is that a lot of times young families have kids. And so it'll just be kind of understanding that that will be a higher capacity for the needs of Tenino School District. I'm going to use a weird word. The wonky thing with the data that I found was that most of the Tenino households don't have kids in their house. So 18 and younger. They don't have kids that are living with them in the house. But those that do have more than one. So they have multiple children in the house. So I've done a couple of housing needs analysis. It's different than what I've seen in the past. So it's something to kind of just take a look at, more of an interesting fact, but it may kind of present as a thing to think about in the future. In regard to housing inventory, you guys have done a really good job in keeping pace to allow for about a 5% vacancy rate. I think about it more of like kind of like hermit crabs when they move shells. There has to be one that's available that's good to live in to move up. And so having the vacant housing, having about a 5% rate is considered healthy. And so you guys have kind of stayed there. Over the years, it's actually diminished. So you've had a higher percentage of people moving into your houses than you have actually houses being built, is what that means. So it just means that there needs to be higher capacity in the going forward of trying to get houses being built here.
I kind of find that interesting because what I hear just anecdotally out in the community, we have a lot of rental houses in our areas, and you hear people saying it's impossible to find a rental house in our community, and maybe it's affordability, but affordability thing too.
Yeah, so that's a great kind of segue. So affordability wasn't found to be the largest issue in Tenino. It's actually availability. It's just there's not enough. And so what happens is when something comes on the market, it's snagged right away because people have to be on it if they want to live here, and they do want to live here. For example, when I checked the houses for sale in Tenino today on Realtor.com, literally today there were 3 in city limits. So, yeah.
And I think it's important to make a point that the rental housing is different than those that are being listed for sale. And so that 5% availability rate is really referring mostly to the for sale homes and not the rental side. So I'm not sure, did you check, I guess the homes that you checked, were those all for sale, the 3?
Those are for sale. Rentals are typically harder to track, and so they're not as easy to kind of understand at just like a high level overview. But yes, yeah, Dan's absolutely right. It does have a different vacancy rate, and I believe the vacancy rate can be lower for rental units, if I remember correctly.
You all remember Ryan Shea, who presented a couple different times? He was in Sandpoint, Idaho. Couldn't find a house here that they could afford, so he took a different job.
Yeah.
Not with our company, and he stayed in that region in Idaho and the Spokane region. He had a hard time finding available rentals. A lot of the rental stock that's available online is managed by a property management company, so there are a couple places to go to look at those, but they're kind of corporate, right? He said the best availability he saw was on things like Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist for rentals. Like, if you're renting out your ADU in your back, that's how you're going to list it. You're not going to hand it over to a Home Street or whatever property management firm. So there's a lot of search friction between people who have and people who have a unit available and those available renters.
Yeah, well, and also private, why am I forgetting the word for it? Not renters.
Investors, like?
No. The people who rent to the people. I don't know why I can't remember the word.
The landlords?
Yes, thank you.
What do I mean?
The private landlords typically are better about getting those ads up and down as fast as possible. And so the websites like Craigslist and anything like that are going to have a better reflection of what's actually available versus the management companies who tend to be a bit slower on it. And so you'll see 20 listings available, but they're not actually, yeah, exactly. They're not actually available. So kind of going into the housing units, most of the housing units here are single family. There's about 61% are single family detached units that have about 2 to 3 bedrooms each, and then cost around, data from this week was about $350,000 to about $500,000. Yeah, it was a wide difference, but here's the thing: there were 3.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I mean, it's one of those things. It's like the data will show a wide variance. Well, yeah, because there's not a lot in the market to balance
compare,
it. Yeah. Yeah, and then and more than about 60% of the single family units are really old. They were built before 1989, and so in housing standards that just, they tend to need a lot more repair and just upkeep and maintenance. And then about the other 38%, or there's another 38% that are more than 50 years old. So just, really historically old buildings. Some of them may have a lot of history, like this one. Some of them are just more available for redevelopment. So in the future. And then you do have quite a bit of housing stock that has been recently built. Most of that is likely just the subdivisions that have recently gone in. I think it was like, what, 2013, 2015, something like that, yeah. And about like 50 to 60 units, so. Job density is concentrated around the schools and commercial corridor. Not surprisingly, that's where most of the jobs in Tenino are, if they're in Tenino. Census data showed that about 44 jobs, or 44 people have jobs and live in Tenino. So let me rephrase that. They both live and commute in Tenino. They don't commute outside. Everybody else commutes in or out. Which, I mean, really just means that there's commercially available, there's jobs, but there could potentially be more, and there is room for growth if that's the way that you guys want it to go.
So that's what's shown on like page 17 on figure 23. That's what that, it's called an IO model, shows, like input, output.
And I think you would look, if you really dug down, I think the school district is by far the biggest employer in our community.
Yeah, if you look at the previous figure 22 on page 15, you'll see that the jobs in Tenino Educational Services is pushing almost 200.
Yeah.
So that is I think that was your next point, that the school district is the largest employer in the city.
Yep. Yeah, it's the largest employer, and then second after that, it is basically retail and food service. So, yeah, grocery store, grocery store, food,
Restaurants,
like
yeah.
anything, yeah, coffee shop. So the gap analysis showed that there's a need for now about 270 housing units. So the listings that we use, basically the figures go from 2020 to 2040, so it'll show a little higher in there, but right now obviously we're not in 2020, and so 270 is about what we still need to build.
One quick question.
So that number is, when you say housing unit, is that 2 to 3 bedroom between 350 to 500,000? Is that what we're?
Anything.
No?
So a 1 bedroom would be a unit. So we're talking about just rentable doors
Or purchasable
Essentially,
doors,
or purchasable. Okay. So just housing. Okay.
Yeah, just housing. Yeah.
Perfect.
yeah, it's just a housing option, and
Yep.
it can be 80 of those units could be just a couple of apartment buildings. Like it's what you guys want to do, and what the city builds capacity to be able to allow for in the code. That's pretty much it. And that's the reasoning for this document, is so that you know what you're looking at in regard to code changes, comprehensive plan changes, anything like that. And then also when you have a variance in front of you and somebody's like, hey, I want to build commercial instead of residential, and that's not what you want, you can come back and be like, we have an obvious need. So that's kind of what it's about. It's not necessarily an argument, it's an informational gain so that you can understand where the city's at. And my favorite part of being a planner. So land capacity in Tenino, most of your availability, not surprisingly, is going to be West Tenino. That area is zoned for what we call as master plan communities. And so the idea, from what I've gathered reading the code and kind of the interviews and stuff, is that a developer would come in, look at the parcels, and then propose a master plan to the city to put in a subdivision. And it's a really good way to ensure that you are planning for the future using that area. So that's kind of the idea, is like you would have a lot of the growth go in there. Thurston Regional Planning Commission does a land capacity, so land development. I'm looking at him because he knows what it's actually called. It's like a land development map, basically. Mm-hmm. And what they did was, in 2017, they looked at what the density for housing was, and they did a heat map. So they showed kind of where a lot of people are congregating in regards to residential units. And then they did a projection to 2040. And so what that projection saw, and it's shown on one of these pages, but I don't have it off the top of my head.
22, yeah,
I
figure
believe so, yeah.
27.
So you'll kind of see that there
Page
is
22.
there is projection that West Tenino is going to start to see higher density. And a lot of it's going to also go south. So what I have a feeling is that what you'll see is a lot of annexations to the south so that you'll receive county property.
That didn't go over too good last time somebody heard that.
Let's see. Sorry, Dan updated my notes.
Remember, you looked at the TRPC report earlier this spring with the constraints maps, and I showed you the interactive map that's on there. And TRPC built those projections and figure 27 on a build out for West Tenino.
Yep.
We know now that there are lots of gophers present on the flat portion of that property. And the upper portion, Lemon Hill, has got capacity for residential units, but access and water and sewer, so utilities are a challenge.
Yep.
So what we don't yet know is what the carrying capacity or the build-out capacity of the stuff up on the hill might be. It could be 5 units, it could be 15. It's probably not going to be 200. We have had developers come in and look at that. If you remember last year, a couple different firms who had the money to do those types of things couldn't make it pencil. It was too much front-end cost, too much capital, and not enough units. And there was the concern, that the challenge with access across the Mazama-Paca Gopher occupied prairie to get up to the hill. So the only access was on the back through Morningside, which is not very good, not real access. So we are going to have to, this is like an existing conditions approach, like this is what is out there right now, both figure 27, figure 28, and figure 29. You can see the environmental constraints is what Alyssa's talking about here, and that had the opportunity for very high redevelopment capacity. I don't think that's the case anymore. We've talked about that before too. So one of the I'll let Alyssa get to her conclusions, but one of the talking points in here is we need to hear from you about how we should be accommodating growth, those 295-ish units, and what types of ideas you have that you could again give us, that we can start thinking through strategies.
Pretty much. Yeah, the environmental factors are definitely going to be constraining, and so that's definitely something that's going to make everybody put more effort into building that residential capacity. But environmental factors are unfortunately getting typically they get more stringent every year instead of lax, and so it's something that eventually it has to pencil out. As I said earlier, availability is more of the issue than affordability. So it's really just about getting more units into the city limits and making it so that people who want to live here can. And then essentially, as Dan said, the environmental constraints pretty much every way around Tenino is going to make the growth absorption within the city limits really what's going to be challenging, because that's where it's going to have to be. So yeah, we would really like your thoughts in regard to potential ideas of where these units could go. If it's higher end or higher density residential units, so like really large apartment complexes, or single family subdivisions. What are you guys like seeing? What are you guys thinking?
Right, and I'll tee this up just one more time. We did a walking tour. We looked at a lot of vacant lots inside Tenino. We continue to have some development activity around short plats, reconfiguration of existing lots. That's what that's what's happening down off of Park and Central. That's occurring. There's some development off of Stage and near Ritter, some infill that's happening. But we know that the easy things that we thought we could do a decade ago, we can't do. Like, we can't build single family or mixed residential units in West Tenino because the endangered species presence won't allow us to do that. We're about out of space going north because we bump into floodplains. On the other side of Scatter Creek, we bump into slope, and there's options there, right? We have potential options south on Dakota Highway, but there's floodplains on that as well, and you also have a active railroad running through there, so there's things to be aware of that. And then if you head east, you also bump into floodplains, right? So there's a reason Tenino is as compact as it is, and so we're looking for your ideas, and then once we chat a little bit, I'll throw a few little like verbal hand grenades out in the midst and see who jumps on it.
So, okay, you want to go?
Maybe. So, is that okay?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
So I mean, I've struggled with, that's on, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I've struggled with the concept of like having to accommodate a certain amount of growth based on projections from some entity somewhere. And so can we maybe start there and talk about like where does that concept come from, and like why are we talking in language that we have to accommodate a particular number? I mean, if the space isn't there, and we're constrained from going this direction and that direction, and environmental considerations, is there a point at which those projections are just wrong?
I'm not blowing smoke. That's a great question. That's a really, really fundamental question. We step back into our GMA 101 classes that I don't know if you were part of them, but you've been around long enough to know the drill. The state Office of Financial Management, through the Growth Management Act, does its own sophisticated demographic modeling to determine how many people are dying, how many people are being born, how many people are moving in, and they have a statewide number that they track, and every 10 years they reset that or reorient that with the benchmark of the census. As an aside, the 2020 census is not very good. There's not a high level of confidence in it. The numbers are probably okay, but none of the socioeconomic population stuff beyond that is carried with very high level of confidence. Okay, so every year OFM does their projections, and then they get up to the decade, and then they reset that a little bit. There's a little bit of an adjustment, but so that's how the whole state does it. They allocate it on a statewide basis, then they allocate it on a countywide basis, again based on migration and cohort, birth and death. So TRPC is the organization, the regional planning organization in our county that's in charge of that population growth number to figure out where our county's population is going. And so our county, Thurston County total is just rolled over 300,000, right? Because that's why we just authorized 2 more commissioners at the county level and 2 more port commissioners. We are over that 300, so we're allowed to have 5. The county's projection for 2040, 2045, well, 2040 is 370, and 2045 is 383. So, we're growing by around 18 to 20,000 people every 5 years. So that's 4,000 to 5,000 people every year coming into the county from other places. So they take that number and then they try to determine where that might go mostly based on proximity to I-5 and other factors like employment growth and where these people are coming from. And most of the people are coming from a northern county that's more urban, and they're migrating south for a variety of reasons. And as jobs open up, there's more opportunity here, and those jobs are typically in the urbanized center, right? So that's a longer answer to the question, which is like, why do we have to plan for growth? It's a fair question as far as that number. Now, there are many cities in the state who aren't a fan of that number, and that number is a negotiated number. That's the honest truth. It's because it's a forecast. It's 15, 20 years out from now. And so how do you know? Well, we don't know. This is just our best guess. And so the OFM will give you a range, a high, medium, and low range of growth based on a variety of factors. And it's up to the jurisdiction at the TRPC level to figure out where they think they fall in the midst of that. And then there's an agreement at that level to accept that as their population forecast. So that's the number you have to plan for. Now, no one stands on the roads out here with the stop sign saying, no, not welcome. Like, stuff just happens, growth
Right.
just happens. Now, there's ways to accommodate that growth, and there's ways to restrict that growth. And accommodation is by having dry, accessible land that's appropriately zoned for residential, and having low barrier of entry, so low impact or no impact fees, lower taxes, available workforce, all of these things, and you will get growth. And there's things to do to inhibit growth. You restrictively zone things. You make development really expensive through impact fees, a whole host of other things, and that will retard that growth. So you don't have to grow that. But there will be pressures. And so what happens is when there's pressures, the cost of the available units will go up because people are willing to pay that amount. And so there's this balance, like what Lisa said about the hermit crab, having to, before it can really move to a new shell, it's got to find that shell, and then it's got to make a run for it, right? And get to there and get in there. And then now its old shell's available, right? But if there's no shell for it to move into, then it will just, well, I think eventually it'll die. I'm not sure, but like it won't be able to grow anymore because its growth is limited by the shell size. So for residential zoning and for land availability, you want to have enough land that you have kind of a market factor in there so that you've got a little bit of float, so that there's always more units than there are people searching. So that you don't have people put a premium on their house because 7 people are bidding for it, right? And then people are overbidding by twice or whatever, and then you recognize that your neighbor just sold their house for twice of what it's assessed for, and so you're like, I'm out, and I'm gonna sell, and so you put your house up for sale at twice what it's assessed for, and it sells, and now we got ourselves a pattern. And now what happens is we have not only not accessible or not available homes, but also not affordable.
And that's why people are moving from Olympia.
Right.
Yes.
And then
So-
people's home values or appraised values go through the roof, which is reflected in their taxes. And
So can I answer? That's what I perceive to be the answer. There are ways that you can get the type of development that you prefer, or to make sure that the type of development in your community meets the standards that you wish to outline. And so that's another way to say, look, if we we're America and we have to accept some amount of growth, because we're not going to put up a wall around our community and whatever, we're going to accept some type of growth, but we want that growth to be reflective of the context, the community, the people who are here, the character. You can do that. That is well within the rights of a planning commission to recommend and a council to adopt codes for that. Now that may escalate the price, it may do other things, gentrify, whatever, but you could allow for mobile homes, detached mobile homes, modular homes everywhere in the city, and you'd see a lot of units pop up pretty quick. But and some places have, and that's a good way to, you know, add units to your community and retain affordability. But there's other things that come with that.
Can I, go ahead?
Long ways around to saying that.
So,
Oh, thank you, though. That makes sense.
so one thing, so this has been ongoing on my kind of like punch list, but Lacey has an ADU program. So we talked about there's a problem with availability, right? We also talked about in here that we have a larger population of young residents, okay? The nice thing about ADUs is, number one, it's diversity. Number two, it's affordable housing. Number three, we live in a city that is older, therefore we have larger property parcels than most. Number four, you incentivize the homeowner to take care of the problem themselves, because now the homeowner says, holy cow, I can build an ADU in the back of my property and now make that an income producer. Now, I had called and talked to the gal at Lacey who oversees the program, and they are more than willing to help us through the process of adopting it. But looks to be so easy that you literally go into the city and they provide you with a packet where all of the permits are already pre-done, the plans are there, and the legwork's done and you just implement. So that's been something that I've been thinking about. I mean, if we want to look at infill, and if we want to look at building diversity, and if we want to look at trying to figure out a way to incentivize people to start taking care of the problem themselves, that might be one really good solution. Yeah.
Can I add just something a little bit to what Dan said? I think the issue is too, we may not want growth, but we still have to plan for it, because if we don't plan, it's going to be chaos. People are going to start moving here. We won't have the right zoning. We won't have the right. So if we don't make any plan, even if people don't move here as expected, we still need to have this plan to, if it does happen, it's not going to hit us by surprise, and we're not going to have the processes in place to make sure we get good development. So,
And
I think it's kind of a catch-22,
Yeah, and you want to do everything you can to keep housing as affordable as possible, right? I mean, you look at what's going on up north, families are being squeezed out, right? So then that totally changes the makeup of the community. I mean, all of that to some degree is just bleeding towards Portland as Portland comes towards Seattle. Does that make sense? So we are getting pinched. But I just think, if we can figure out some good avenues to...
Yeah. I've looked at that ADU thing too, and I've always been a supporter of ADUs, but when I looked at Lacey's, those houses are pretty expensive when you start looking at in Lacey, because what happens, what I understand, it costs almost the same to build a small house as it does a big house, because the fixtures and the plumbing are similar cost. Doesn't matter if it's 500 square feet or 2,000 square feet. Because I was thinking about building one. It was like $250,000 to build a small ADU on your property, even if you already have the property there. So
Yeah.
you've really got to look at
Yeah, so a couple details on that, like the connection charge is the same whether you have a 4,000 square foot house or a 1,000 square foot house. The design fees, I think, from your design professionals are going to be about the same whether you have a 10,000 square foot lot or a 5,000 square foot lot.
Now, if we wanted to create a program with the design fees, could that be all part of the initial packet that someone picks out when they choose the style that they want?
Yeah,
and then
so
the connection fees, is that something that we as the city are the ones that are saying? So even if we wanted to, I'm just wondering, do we have any?
I'll start with the second one first. The connection fees to connect to sewer and water are a connection fee that the city assesses, and that is designed, Troy could tell you better than I could, but it's designed to recapture some of the capital cost for the facilities and also go towards replacement and depreciation, things like that. So that's a fee that the city charges. I think it's currently around $11,000. Is that right? I think that's right. I think it's like $8,000 for sewer and $3,000 for water, something like that per unit. Dave, just by way of reference, the impact fees in Olympia, and we don't have any impact fees in Tenino. Impact fees in Olympia at $35,000 to the price of a single family residence, and that's for fire impact, for parks impact, for schools impact, for transportation impact fees. Yeah. So the other part of your question, in Lacey, they they engineered those structures and they did plan review on them by their building department, and they're approved, ready to go. So that's the advantageous part of that approach, is that they are all pre-approved. They're allowed by right, and if you meet the setbacks, you just go and and they've even pre-arranged financing with local banks. So
Yeah.
I don't know which banks it is. You go into, ABC Bank and you show them the plan, and they'll if you're credit worthy, they'll loan you the money for it. But what Dave is saying is absolutely true. They are solid 6-figure investments. They are not like a $55,000,
Tiny house or totally.
because
totally.
they still have to meet all the building codes. They still have certain R value requirements. There's a bunch of other things that kick in there, and there's site improvements. So you have to do a driveway and a parking pad. They've got a lot of times they need to have their own meter. I don't know how they do that, but so it's not like a cheap option. It's cheaper than a brand new home, but it's not like what you'd want it to be.
Well, I thought maybe 150.
Yeah, $150,000 for a 2-bedroom, mother-in-law in your back, that's got a studio or it's got a kitchen and all this other stuff. Nope, it's gonna be.
So I mean, looking at it, is it feasible? I mean, I guess I haven't talked to Lacey in a while. I wonder how successful that program is. Is it actually a feasible option that is a good, I don't want to say weapon to have in your arsenal, but a good, because I think that the housing problem, there's not going to be one fix. We know that, right? It's not like one huge community with 1,000 homes, of which 5 are all the same, floor plan. We're going to have to figure out multiple different things to facilitate and push diversity and affordability.
My understanding is I think Lacey's had 4 ADUs built since that program was established.
So not very successful is what you're saying.
And I could ask Sarah or Rick or any of the folks there at Lacey, but I think it's single digits.
Okay.
It's not like they're running off the shelves, and the cost is the reason.
So you're telling me we want to do it better? That's what you're telling me.
Yeah, it's an option, but you have to do it better.
Yeah.
So
I want to
exactly.
do different, yeah.
So let me say a couple things about what Tenino does do for accessory building, because we do allow ADU accessory dwelling units to be built. There's 2 being built right now in the city. They are on the same parcel that a new single family stick built home. They're all stick built, but it's new single family. Right, 2 parcels right next to each other. They've got a primary unit and an ADU unit. So it's 2 lots, 4 new units. They'll each have their own address and all that type of stuff. I think they're even like connected separately. So for all intents and purposes, it looks like 4 single family homes, but it's on 2 lots with a primary and an ADU. So the standard is in the single family, which is single family ES, which is environmentally sensitive zone, and the single family duplex zone, and the multifamily zoning districts, accessory buildings greater than 120 square feet, but not exceeding 1,000 square feet, which don't exceed 14 feet in height, may be placed within the interior and rear yard. Both the setbacks and have to be maintained and stuff like that. And you still have fire setbacks. You have to 6 feet setback from other structures to meet the fire code. If you're closer than that, you have to do a bunch of crazy stuff that makes it expensive. So that's the standard right now, 1,000 square foot. And I think we've permitted 3 or 4. I think I've got 3 in the pipeline right now. One at the Neves property.
We're already doing better than Lacey.
Yeah,
We were already
I know.
Lacey
What's
already.
up? So
Catch my idea.
I think here. What other comments are there before I throw my little verbal hand grenade out there?
I have one comment on them. I think what makes them more affordable, like the one she's talking about, is right down by my house. They built, the owner that built the house is a construction person, so he has an advantage. But he built the garage with something on top of it. So like me, I want to build a garage. You get to go up to a 2nd floor and add a living space on top of it. I think makes a much different picture than if you're just building a standalone. So there's some things like that I think that you can do that may make some difference on.
And I think that's going to be a big part of the solution, is just how do we try to reinvent the property that we have
Right.
to allow multiple residents. I like that.
There's also an option of just doing pre-approved like model homes or get with a developer that's local that you know can meet the ADU code, and maybe the homeowner does all of the legwork and pencil and graph paper or whatever for the site plan. But if the home is already pre-approved, then you can potentially lessen some of the permitting costs in regard to at least the planning side, and then talk to the rest of the city in regard to the potentials on that. And then essentially you're circumventing.
So that would be kind of like the ADU program, only for regular size houses. Is that what you're saying? Like you would have.
Small houses.
Well, there are a lot of developers and model home manufacturers that will specifically have units that are under 1,000 square feet. And so I've seen quite a few that are like 700, they're like 1 to 2 bedrooms. They're really what you're looking for as
Totally.
an ADU. But they're selling it as this is a single family, this goes on a lot. But that doesn't necessarily mean that has to be what it is. So
Sure.
it is worth looking into and potentially talking to some manufacturers or some developers to see, because stick built might be cheaper, but at least that's something that you could potentially look into.
Yeah. Okay, no, I understand. Perfect.
I got one other comment that I think would be an option. Why does the city work with a nonprofit that Homes First, or what's the other that builds Habitat for Humanity? Why don't we work with them to allow individuals work with Habitat for Humanity to build lower, help reduce the cost, where people come in and help build, and owners say, hey, you can live in this facility for X number. So I think there's a lot of things that's just one I thought about, but I think there's things you could look at doing possibly that could help reduce the cost of some of that kind of thing.
Yeah. Homes First. So I will say I do volunteer with Homes First on the side. So they do mostly redevelop houses, and so they'll go in and overhaul them. And what they particularly like is to go in and buy the property for a low value, and then redevelop it in a more economical way, and then rent it or out but from there. Whereas opposed to, why am I forgetting the name of Habitat for Humanity?
I said Homes First because I couldn't think of Habitat for Humanity. That just came to my mind, but I was more looking at Habitat for Humanity, and they have a little bit different model too, but that doesn't mean if you went to them and said, hey, we want, we're very interested in trying to make affordable housing, can we partner with you somehow to work together to do something?
Well, there's also Thurston Land Trust too, so or the Housing Land Trust. So there are options for nonprofits that can potentially, be worked with to really help develop the community in ways that you're looking for. And I know Homes First, at least, they're in Tumwater right now with a couple of developments. So, and they are doing ADUs. They're overhauling one house that was sitting on, I don't know how long it was on the market, but it's not a great house. And they're putting in 2 ADUs on another lot, so another 2 lots. So those are options for nonprofits that potentially you just need to see what you guys really want to and how you want to go forward.
Drop your bomb.
Did you at one point do some analysis on the potential capacity for ADU in the city? I think I remember something about that.
Yeah, we built a map that showed which lots had sufficient space, we thought, for additional density. And TRPC did that as well. So I think there's a couple of themes floating about. One is like the types of housing. Is there support from the Planning Commission to evaluate additional dwelling units of both a single family and a multifamily and a mixed use density type? I mean, is there support for meeting your growth targets through a variety of housing types.
I'm all for it. I think with the limited space we have to look at doing things like that. If we really, you know,
Yeah, I think we have to be open to it, but like we were saying before, I mean, the pressure's there. We're just hoping to be able to direct it kind of in the way that fits the way we look at things. Does that make sense? So, but yeah.
So to put a sharper point on that, and we don't have to, I'm not going to make you pick right now, but if you want to turn to page 20, the figure 26 is the city of Tenino zoning. Which, by the way, I sort of think your map looks like an alligator, but that's always, I always turn zoning maps into animals. It's a curse. So
It's a gift.
that light yellow is a single family zone. The pale green is single family. Let's see I'm trying to see it. Single family duplex is kind of the olive color. That's the stuff right at the curve of the road. That's kind of in the notch there, right in the middle. I can't see I think it's Witchman by Witchman. You know, that's a duplex zone, and where I'm going with this is the orange multifamily residential is right around the core, is all that's zoned orange, and there's a little bit of orange that's north of the grocery store, right? And I think that's actually a vacant parcel. So in order to get a wide variety of use housing types, you have to have the zoning allow it. And right now, the predominant zoning is single family, and then the next most predominant zoning is single family duplex, which is a duplex by right, which could actually be with the ADU code, actually be a duplex plus an ADU, so you could get three units if you have the space for it. So not asking you to decide that now, but that's how that conversation evolves, is thinking about what areas of the community you might need to allow for additional residential use types because you are limited on what is allowed, what it's permitted to do right now under the regulations. Does that make sense?
I think I talked a little bit about that when I first came on the planning council, about opening up our restrictions on some of the areas to different types of housing in our city. I mean, I was more talking about more wide open, but at least I think we need to make some less restrictive, especially that single family. It just makes no sense with our restrictions to just have such a big, I know that's what everybody wants. You talk to anybody in the city that lives here on that lot now, they want to keep their nice lot with their lots of room. But I think we have to somehow allow some other kinds of development in that single family area, especially that's, if we're gonna in any way meet the housing that we really need, and especially affordable housing.
The zoning code doesn't actually have the word apartment in it. It has single family attached of more than 3 units. That's how it's defined. And the lenders look at anything with more than 4 attached as a commercial lending thing. So if you keep it at 4 or below, so if you have a quad or a fourplex, you can still get residential financing, which changes the terms and a whole lot of other things that, anyway, so there's, so that's one thing. So the types, be aware of the types. The second part is the availability of land. And with West Tenino taken off the table by and large, and as we move into 2023, and in July, remember there's comp plan update work to be done. We'll talk about that. Lisa and I will put a little work plan together for the planning commission, so you kind of know what's coming up in the next 10 to 12 months in 2023. But one of them is begin the work of updating and overhauling the comp plan as part of the periodic review. And so there's opportunities for other spots, targeted spots within Tenino or on the edges where you can add areas into your UGA, your urban growth areas, for future annexation, which could meet some of those population targets.
Can I ask you guys a question just about the report overall? I know you have to have statistics, and it's hard to get stuff that's current, so I know it's stopped. This is all in 2020. How do you look? Is there a way that you look forward? I mean, just like affordability, it's talk about affordability really isn't an issue. Well, I think since 2020, affordability has become much more of an issue. How do you kind of look forward on that kind of stuff when you're planning on what you want to do, or how? Is there a way you can kind of I don't know, say what's happening, what the reality is now, or do you always have to just stick to what the published numbers are from 2020?
Like a projection of affordability.
Yeah, I mean.
Well, you really get the affordability by having the availability. That's kind of the thing. And that's kind of that was the problem in 2020, was that everybody was looking for a house, and there were not really houses on the market. And the houses that were on the market were exorbitantly high because people couldn't afford it. And so that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid, the lack of availability to the point where everybody's like, oh yeah, I will pay $800,000 for a $350,000 house. We don't want that, but we do want a little bit of growth, limited, because it's just going to happen. It just is. And we want to kind of understand how to move forward in that kind of capacity. And so what you do is essentially you're looking at how your averages, like how many developments do you have per year? How many do you need to accommodate the 200 and whatever, units? If you're averaging 8 units a year, I'm just throwing out numbers, so don't quote me. But if you're averaging 8 units a year, right, and you have 6 units always being, or 9 units always being filled, and you have 10 extra units, you're always going to have one less extra unit, and eventually you're going to be at capacity, and you're not going to have any vacancy, and that's when you're going to hit that point. So no, there's no magic way of knowing what the availability and the affordability is going to look like. Well, availability, but affordability is going to look like. You can kind of assume throughout the process that if the availability is there, just a little bit, just to have the vacancy, then you'll have that affordability. But
it's hard. I mean,
Yeah.
I told these guys a small house across the street from me was on the market for a rental. Small 3-bedroom house, older house. They were asking like $1,800 a month for it, for rent.
Yeah.
That's cheap.
And that's
Around here, that is inexpensive.
Compared to Olympia, and for here.
Yeah.
And it's just, to me, in the last couple of years, especially with the prices that gone. I mean, I appreciate the 2020 numbers and having to have something really to base it on. But when I look at affordability, the last couple of years, things have changed drastically. Affordability, and I don't think it's all just because we don't have housing stock. It's because people can't afford to live in Olympia more, so they're trying to like you said, they're willing to pay more. Here it's cheap. $1,800 is cheap here, so they're willing to. And just how there's so many things that can come into play. I mean, with affordability, it's like,
Well, it's affordable for who?
Yeah.
Then you guys statistically, the
there's
median household income is less than regional, and that I think is on page 19.
Kind of shows what the.
Sorry, I was way off. Page 7. But I mean, yes, these are 2020 numbers, so they are a little outdated. And because Tenino has less of a population than other places, the numbers tend to fluctuate more, as I was kind of saying earlier. And so, what it says is in 2020, renters made about 35,000 and homeowners made about 71,000, and that's per household. That's not even per person. That's per household. Yeah. And I mean, even regionally comparison, Thurston made 48.5. So, and that was renters. And that's a huge difference. I mean, that's, you know, 13 grand a year is a big difference.
Especially when you're low income. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's where the affordability needs to be in our head when, you know, when you're thinking about where is Tenino and what we need to do. That's who we need to plan for.
Can I make a point real quick here
Oh,
too?
absolutely.
That chart there that has the incomes, I think it's kind of in the wrong order because it says extreme low is 35,000 and very low is 25,000. It seems like those two on page 8, 7. This one, these two don't make, looks like they're reversed. The dollar figures, I think. Is that right? Am I looking at that right? Because extremely low income should be the lowest. Very low income should be the next.
Oh, yeah. So, that is weird. I will look into that.
Well, something's out of order because there's a high, medium, there's a high, and then there's a low or a medium and a low and a high. Yeah, so it looks something.
I think those two columns just got maybe switched, maybe.
Yes, I will look into that. It was copied over from HUD income limits, so
Yeah.
I'll look into
It's no
that.
biggie. I just think I pointed out just for.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
So here's a question. I'm just thinking out loud, but so like governments are always incentivizing to, you know, for things or that they want to have happen, right? So like, has anyone ever done a program where they say, hey, we need to build 25 new doors a year for the next 5 years? So I have a program where, you know, people can come forth, pay their fees, and as long as they build the property within that calendar year, maybe they get half of their fees back, or something that incentivizes people to lock in and then build within like a calendar year.
I'm aware of a couple other programs, not that one, not something like that in particular. I would just opine that fees have to be pretty high in order to be waived and have it make a difference in anything.
Totally. Okay.
If you're building a $300,000 house and you are asking for $2,500 worth of fees to be waived, it might not be too much in the way of an incentive. But what there is there's something called a multifamily tax exemption, where if you can designate through an overlay zone areas in your community that you want to encourage affordable housing and multifamily housing. And if someone builds a multifamily unit and builds multifamily units in that area, they can apply for that MFTE, and they have their property taxes capped at the pre-build amount, and it's limited at that pre-build amount for like a period of 10 years. And so if the pre-capital, pre-construction amount is $200,000 and you're paying $1,500 a year in taxes or whatever, you get to retain that and pay that $1,500 for 10 years before you start paying the, you know, $7.2 million assessed fee and evaluation on it. The thinking being is that you're you know, through that long-term program, you are incentivizing multifamily units in a place that may not otherwise get that. But you have to be careful because, you know, in a sense, somebody's paying, right? The way that property taxes work is you have an assessed valuation, and that tax of your community, and that tax is spread out amongst all the taxpayers. And so your mill rate is based on, you probably remember this, but your mill rate's based on what you're trying to collect. And the more taxpayers you have with the higher assessments, the more it's spread out across everybody, versus fewer homes and assessments, it's kind of concentrated. So you still end up, the city still is collecting what they need to collect,
Right.
either way.
So you're pushing
Sure.
on the other property owners.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. So in that
Right.
case, that burden is now dispersed amongst everybody else because that property owner is not going to be paying their fair share.
True.
Can I ask about it's figure 28, vacant and redevelopment potential for Tenino parcels on page 23,
Yeah, and that's that TRPC map.
CRPC, and it looks like all of that is in commercial zones. At least that isn't, you know, it's in the vacant or very high redevelopment color on that. Is there something about that zone that is prompting it to show up as a redevelopment potential, or is it about the property?
That map is specifically designed to look at commercial value property.
Oh, okay.
But it can be interpreted in more than that capacity. It's specifically designed to look at the commercial capacity and redevelopment potential.
Okay.
But that also looks at vacant lots. So
There's another map that gets at residential. That's the one with the grays, and the darker blacks.
yes, yeah. I am in the process of reworking that because I find that it's very difficult to read.
It's hard to read.
So yeah, I am building another map that replicates that in an easier to read manner. Because if I have a hard time as a planner looking at it, I know nobody else is going to understand it. So.
I can make a point on these. I think this map is from 2017, so it shows all that West Thurston, this area.
Yeah.
But if you look below in 2022, now it's all environmental constraints, because I think when this first map was made, that whole gopher thing wasn't as. So I think that map is an age thing too.
Yeah.
I don't think that would be that color now if they were doing it today.
Yeah, and you adapted map figure 29 from the Esri information and the county's information, it looks like.
Yes, yeah, I built figure 29, and I had included the master plan oriented area as West Tenino, because that is what it is, but it is an environmentally constrained parcel, and so that's why that is red like the other residential, So yeah, the new map that would reflect more of the residential will look more like figure 29, and figure 28 may or may not still exist as it's currently.
And then one last thing, so as I look at figure 27, as we look at the 2017 compared to the 2045 projections, Dan, it kind of goes back to where you were pointing out on the map. It's showing the kind of primary growth that we're going to see is right along that Sussex and Maintown corridor. So it does seem like probably one of the easiest and most basic things to do would be to relook at zoning.
Okay. The thing I wanted to float as well as that, which is a good thing for us to review, is parking minimums. One of the things we heard back in our comments from community members when we interviewed them was that there's plenty of street parking in Tenino, and we don't need to mandate minimums for residential lots, which would mean currently, in the way most places do it, is they require at least 2 off-street parking stalls, and that ends up being the 2 that are in front of your double car garage, because the stalls in your garage are not considered parking stalls. You don't get to count those.
Because they're usually filled with stuff.
That's right. Filled with stuff. So when you spend and the way this stuff works with like a domino effect, that requires the setback of that garage to be 20 feet from a property line, because you're going to park your big truck in front of your garage and you can't be hanging out into the street or over the sidewalk. So you got to set everything back so that your truck can sit in front of your garage and not sit out in the middle of the street.
So, and then another problem, right, is we're trying to project. I mean, if my personal thought is in 20 years, probably none of us will own a car. We'll be a member of a service where we just push a button and a driverless car or truck shows up and takes us where we need to, and then we push another button when we're ready to go somewhere else, right? I mean, we don't know, so.
Didn't they try that?
Huh?
Didn't they try that?
I do think so. That's if you were to change or eliminate parking requirements, that would change the ability to accommodate homes instead of driveways and instead of garages in the same sense. Because, for example, we have some of these units that are going in right now have the ADUs have a minimum stall of 1. A primary home, has a minimum stall of 2. So, you know, they're both residential. Yeah, so in a situation where you're building a home and you're building an ADU at the same time, you're having to provide for 3 off-street parking stalls. And some of the commentary was, we got plenty of streets out here, we got plenty of shoulder, and we shouldn't be making such a big deal about parking minimums. So,
When we're looking at parking minimums, are we looking, I mean, would anyone ever do like a stared approach? Like maybe the next 5 years it's required this, and then from 5 to 10 years it steps down to this. I'm just wondering.
I don't know if have you ever seen any, we could look into that. I'm not aware of that at all, a step down approach.
And that might not even be, I don't know, maybe that's not even a great idea, because you might get people that are building on that want to build on year 8, but they go, oh, if I wait 2 more years. So
Yeah.
I think part of it is you have to have a compelling government interest to do any of this stuff. And so to tier it like that would be like, how does the government interest change year over year over year? So, but that's a good point.
I have a question about the parking requirements. I know there's several homes that maybe don't even have a driveway, so they only have street parking. Is that factored in at all?
I'm guessing those homes are historic or older, and maybe that's why they don't have a parking, off-street parking. I'm not sure what you mean by factor. What?
I guess, just thinking about for those homeowners, if there's no parking requirements and then there's more cars out on the streets and
Right.
impacting homeowners having a place to park that don't have.
Right. There are parking minimums for commercial operations. So, a dental clinic or a grocery store or a bar or they do have mandatory off-street parking that's required. There's some parking that can be accommodated on-street, but most of the time you have a minimum for that, and it's based on like a per thousand. So when the grocery store redeveloped and the gas station came in, they had to do a parking calculation because the hope was that you wouldn't expand the gas station, the fueling station, to the extent that impacted the grocery store's parking field at their minimums. And that, I think that particular use, for example, is pretty dialed in on the parking count. Like you need all those stalls almost all the time. There's an organization that planners like and Alyssa and I pay attention to called Strong Towns. And Strong Towns has a contest every year on Black Friday. They want their members to go out and take pictures of parking lots on the busiest shopping day of the year to see how much of that parking field is actually used. It's pretty sad. Most of the time, even on the busiest shopping day of the year, it's 2/3 full. Right.
Everybody shops online.
Yeah. So I'm not suggesting that we try to solve a housing issue with a minimum parking change for the commercial side. I am asking you to think about what it would look like to evaluate parking minimums for residential. And then I think your point about like how does that impact people who are already parking on the street, and if you're in Seattle or downtown Tacoma or areas like that where you see older, like kind of post-war subdivisions that are, they're already parking on the street, and they'll have a little sign that'll say, resident parking only, permit for or whatever. So people are parking who live there because they are worried about people who aren't living there parking, because of whatever reason. So another long-winded answer. So that was my little verbal, maybe be thinking about, you can't make more land. We can't, go flatten the hill or fill the wetland or the creek to make more developable land. We could evaluate how to use the land that we have more efficiently. And there seems to be, so the grid network in Tenino is awesome, right? You can get a variety of places through a variety of different pathways. A lot of the landscape is filled up with roads, and huge right-of-ways, right?
Yeah.
You know, 60-foot
Highways.
right-of-ways in a residential street. So there's been some pressure, as you remember, from people asking for vacations or right-of-way, shrinking the right-of-way and stuff like that. You know, the right-of-way is designed to accommodate not just cars, but also pedestrians, and we don't have a lot of sidewalks in Tenino. So typically when you build a new set of homes, like what's going on at Stage Street, what's going to be built across from the school there, they're building sidewalks. But they are picking up their parking count both on street and off street. So they're gonna have, they can meet their parking count because of the stalls that they've outlined on the street that they're gonna stripe. They're not gonna be theirs, they'll still be in the public right of way, but they can, you know, that's how we keep them from having to do structured parking on site, which is a deal breaker if you try to do underground or, you know, or structured parking, and also not have the parking lot dominate that use. So the parking's behind it and the units are up on the corner. So one of the things, everybody's looking at this housing stuff. We talked about that before too. So one of the things we're trying to do is make sure we're looking at what other places are doing. City of Yelm's going through a housing code, bunch of other places all over the state. So we're looking at those best studies. We're going to bring some of those recommendations back to you. Some of those places aren't thinking about doing some of the things you're doing, so we'll bring back some that are just germane just to Tenino. Like the parking.
Well, we
I
just
g-
had an issue with the business too, didn't we? That moved in and didn't have parking adequate for the business. I think we're possibly still having. Yeah, big issue.
What other comments reading through the report? Do you have other questions, other observations?
I have one more, and I'll be quiet. I had a lot when I was reading through it, but how do you factor in other external costs when you're looking at affordable housing? For instance, you know, we just did a sewer rate study, and we've got one of the highest rates for sewer in our, you know, in the county, or probably in the state almost. Do you look at those other kind of factors when you're talking about affordability? Or do you bring in other external factors, or are you just looking basically only at the structure?
We basically look at what the houses are actually going for, and that kind of factors in all of that, because if they're new houses, it's factoring it most recently, so you're going to see typically higher costs. And then if it's older houses, you know, that cost has been paid down over the years, and so you typically have the lower costs, and it's already factored in. You don't have to really, it would be redundant to factor it in again, and also it'd just be difficult and difficult in not a good capacity. So, but yeah, that's
I just
typically
heard
how.
people talk about
Sewer.
I don't know if anybody mentioned it here, but the sewer rates basically, it's not the water. Our water is very cheap, but I think I've heard other people that are in the housing industry saying that's a deterrent for growth here, because our rates are especially for lower income people, are significant.
I've definitely seen jurisdictions, you know, reach out to all the different departments and have a sit down, you know, just like a quorum of all of the different departments, and talk about like what the prices are for, you know, what they actually need to ensure capacity and everybody's paid appropriately. But also, you know, what local areas are also, you know, charging for those. And I don't know what Tenino's utility rates are, but I have kind of seen a couple for Tumwater and that area, and it's expensive, but there are programs that you can potentially, if you talked with Public Works or you talked with the different departments, there are programs that they could essentially do for different types of like construction that would allow for some sort of reduction. So
I'm seeing $150 a month listed as a sewer fee. Does that sound about right?
They just
Yeah.
did a study that this got accepted, so it's out there. I mean, they're projecting level rates for the next 10 years at that rate, I think is what it was, wasn't it?
We have a massive loan to pay off still.
Yeah, big loan to pay off. So the affordability is not on the M&O and like the annual cost. It's just on the house of the price. The entrance point, the entrance price point to getting in compared to the average median income of your residents. That's
It's not looking at developer affordability, it's looking at just the actual
yeah, and
price
it's not
of the
looking at
house.
maintenance and cost, 15 years down the road, ongoing, like, or how much is the roof going to cost to replace, even
Like,
though,
could be
right, because
could
it's
be
assessed
property
lower, right,
taxes,
right,
yeah,
right.
hundreds of things, that's what I was, yeah. I just find it interesting, because I think when you really look at affordability, to some extent, I know, like you said, there's probably 1,000 things you could bring into it if you wanted to, but, so you gotta kind of focus on one thing, but they are factors that people look at when they're
Oh yeah,
housing.
absolutely. And a lot of this will be kind of looking at how we can help, developers, not have such exorbitant prices when they're developing in here. And then also maybe bringing in nonprofits and maybe waiving their fees. There are options that we've definitely seen other jurisdictions do. I don't know. I've not talked to those jurisdictions in regard to how those programs have worked, but that's definitely something that we can discuss, and that we'll definitely look into in regard to the whole actual housing action plan and the solutions that we present. Or the recommendations that we present, not solutions.
One of the last comments, and we can get at this in the housing action plan too, because again, it's not just types, it's not just availability, but it's the people and whether they can afford it. Because there's a comment in here specifically about senior housing, and so we didn't mention that at all. But that's I think that's a very viable approach. Senior development is viable, and that ends up being. I'll have to look at the code because I can't recall how it's categorized in Tenino's code, but obviously if you're 65 and older, you don't need a huge yard most of the time. There's an interest in maybe smaller units, kind of progressive. We talked about before what's happening up on Yelm Highway by the Briggs Y as you go up this, so there's like, I get the materials right, it's like copper leaf, silver leaf, and gold leaf or something like that, but as you age, you can kind of age and just bounce from unit to unit, and I don't know if it's progressive assisted living there, but they do have models like that where you be in a complex and you're completely independent living, and then maybe you have a shared cooking facility or someone comes in and helps with cooking and bathing or whatever, and then there's more like a full-on full care. So there's options with that too, and in a community like Tenino that's walkable and has services, other than medical, for the most part, it's accessible to medical. There's options there for growth too, and those can count as units depending on how they're configured.
Saying walkable made me think that was my other point. I believe we try to make our community as walkable as possible. If we're going to try, especially like seniors or people that don't have lower income. If we put them clear out on the edge of the town, it makes it very difficult for them to do anything. If we're going to look at housing for, especially like I said, lower, we need to keep it so they can get to a store easily or get to the doctor's office here in town easily or a lot of those kind of things. So I think that's one of the considerations we need to look at, especially around older and lower income citizens.
Totally.
Yeah.
Not just older, but younger too.
But
right?
anybody,
Like,
yeah, everybody should be
single
able to walk the
moms,
store.
new couples, and then if we have them, if we can infill and build a great, vibrant downtown, then hopefully they start spending more time here. They start eating here. They walk here.
Right.
I totally agree.
So page 14 goes over the special housing inventory that's specifically regarding what Tenino offers for low income and senior housing. And it is one facility that has, it's essentially, it's two buildings, but it's sandstone. Like it's really one. And so that's not, you have like, what, 2,000 people, over 2,000 people, and it accommodates like 60-ish.
Yeah.
So there's definitely potential for adding senior and disabled and low-income housing.
Anything else? Yeah, I think that's about end of the comments there. So I want to thank Melissa and Dan for this report. This is a lot of really good information for us to evaluate as we go forward and try to figure out what to do. So thank you so much for that. Anybody have any announcements or anything? Great.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah,
Happy
Merry
holidays.
Christmas, everyone.
We'll see you next year. This meeting's adjourned.